Hi, my sweet friends, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. Today we're continuing reading from Robinson Crusoe, starting with Chapter 3, Life and Travel in South America. We had a very good voyage to the Brazils and arrived in All Saints Bay in about 22 days. And now I was once more delivered from the most miserable of all conditions of life, and what to do next with myself I was now to consider. The generous treatment the captain gave me I can never enough remember. He would take nothing of me for my passage, gave me 20 ducats for the leopard's skin and 40 for the lion's skin, which I had in my boat, and caused everything I had in the ship to be punctually delivered me. And what I was willing to sell he bought, such as the cases of bottles, 2 of my guns, and a piece of the lump of beeswax, for I had made candles of the rest. In a word, I made about 220 pieces of 8 of all my cargo, and with this stock I went on shore in the Brazils. I had not been long here before I was recommended to the house of a good honest man like myself, who had an ingenio, as they call it, that is, a plantation and a sugar house. I lived with him some time, and acquainted myself by that means with the manner of their planting and making of sugar. Seeing how well the planters lived and how they grew rich quickly, I resolved if I could get license to settle there that I would turn planter among them. I decided in the meantime to find some way to have my money, which I had left in London, remitted to me. To this purpose, getting a kind of letter of naturalization, I purchased as much land that was uncured as my money would reach, and formed a plan for my plantation and settlement, and such a one as might be suitable to the stock which I planned to receive from England. I had a neighbor, a Portuguese of Lisbon, born of English parents, whose name was Wells. He was in much such circumstances as I was. I call him neighbor because his plantation lay next to mine, and we went on very sociably together. My stock was low, as his was, and we rather planted for food than anything else for about 2 years. However, we began to increase, and our land began to come into order, so that the 3rd year we planted some tobacco and made each of us a large piece of ground ready for planting canes in the year to come, but we both wanted help. I had no remedy but to go on. I had fallen into an employment quite remote to my genius, and directly contrary to my desires. I regretted that I had left my father's house and broken through all his good advice. I said to myself that I might as well have stayed at home in England among my friends. I ought never to have come these 5,000 miles to be among strangers. In this manner I used to look upon my condition with the utmost regret. I had nobody to converse with, but now and then this neighbor. No work to be done but by the labor of my hands, and I used to say that I lived just like a man cast away upon some desolate island that had nobody there but himself. But how just has it been, and how should all men reflect that when they compare their present conditions with others that are worse, heaven may oblige them to make the exchange, and teach them to be convinced of their former felicity by their experience. I say, how just has it been that the truly solitary life I reflected on in an island of mere desolation should be my lot, who had so often unjustly compared it with the life which I then led, in which, had I continued, I had in all probability been exceeding prosperous and rich. I was in some degree settled in my measures for carrying on the plantation before my kind friend, the captain of the ship that took me up at sea, went back, for the ship remained there, providing his loading and preparing for his voyage, nearly 3 months. When I told him what little stock I had left behind me in London, he gave me this friendly and sincere advice. "Signor Inglés," says he, for so he always called me, "if you will give me letters and an order made out to me, with directions to the person who has your money in London to send your effects to Lisbon to such persons as I shall direct, and in such good as are proper for this country, I will bring you the produce of them, God willing, at my return." Excuse me. However, since human affairs are all subject to changes and disasters, I would have you give orders for but 100 pounds sterling, which you say is half your stock, and let the hazard be run for the first. Then, if it comes safe, you may order the rest the same way. If it miscarries, you may have the other half to have recourse to it for your supply. This was such wholesome advice, and looked so friendly, that I could not but be convinced that it was the best course that I could take. So I accordingly prepared letters to the gentlewoman with whom I had left my money, and gave an order to the Portuguese captain as he desired. I wrote the English captain's widow a full account of all my adventures, my slavery, my escape, and how I had met with the Portuguese captain at sea, the humanity of his behavior, and what condition I was now in, with all other necessary directions for my supply. When this honest captain came to Lisbon, he found means by some of the English merchants there to send over not the order only, but a full account of my story to a merchant at London who repeated it to my friend. Thereupon she not only delivered the money, but out of her own pocket sent the Portugal captain a very handsome present for his humanity and charity to me. The merchant in London spent this £100 for English goods such as the captain had written for, and sent them directly to him at Lisbon. He brought them all safe to me to the Brazils. Among them, without my directions, for I was too young in my business to think of them, he had taken care to have all sorts of tools, ironwork, and utensils necessary for my plantation, and which were of great use to me. When this cargo arrived, I thought my fortune made, for I was surprised and delighted at it. My good steward, the captain, had taken the £5 which my friend had sent him for a present for himself, to purchase and bring me over a servant under bond for 6 years' service. He would not accept any consideration, except a little tobacco of my own produce, which I insisted that he accept. Neither was this all. My goods, being all English manufactures, such as cloth, stuffs, baize, and things particularly valuable and desirable in the country, I found means to sell them to a very great advantage, so that I may say I had more than 4 times the value of my first cargo, and was now infinitely beyond my poor neighbor in the advancement of my plantation. The first thing I did was to buy a Negro slave and another European servant besides the one which the captain had brought me from Lisbon. But as abused prosperity is oftentimes made the very means of our greatest adversity, so it was with me. I went on the next year with great success in my plantation. I raised 50 great rolls of tobacco on my own ground, more than I had disposed of for necessaries among my neighbors, and these 50 rolls, each above 100 weight, were well cured and laid by against the return of the fleet from Lisbon. And now, as I increased in business and in wealth, my head began to be full of projects and undertakings beyond my reach, such as are indeed often the ruin of the best heads in business. As I had persisted in breaking away from my parents, so I could not be content now, but I must go and leave the happy view I had of being a rich and thriving man in my new plantation, only to pursue a rash and immoderate desire of rising faster than the nature of the thing admitted. Thus I cast myself down again into the deepest gulf of human misery that ever man fell into, or perhaps that could be consistent with life and a state of health in the world. Let me come then by the proper degrees to the particulars of this part of my story. As you may suppose, since I had now lived almost 4 years in the Brazils, and had begun to thrive and prosper very well upon my plantation, I had not only learned the language, but had contracted acquaintance and friendship among my fellow planters, as well as among the merchants at St. Salvador, which was our port. In my discourses among them, I had frequently given them an account of my 2 voyages to the coast of Guinea, the manner of trading with the Negroes there, and how easy it was to purchase upon the coast for trifles such as beads, toys, knives, scissors, hatchets, bits of glass, and the like, not only gold dust, guinea grains, elephant's teeth, but Negroes, for the service of the Brazils in great numbers. They listened always very attentively to my discourses on this subject, but especially to that part which related to buying Negroes. It happened one day that I was with some merchants and planters of my acquaintance, and as usual I talked of those things very earnestly. The next morning 3 of them came to me and told me that they had been thinking very much about what I had told them the night before. They came to make a secret proposal to me, and after enjoining secrecy, they told me that they had a mind to fit out a ship to go to Guinea. They all had plantations as well as I, and were in need of servants. They knew that this was a trade that could not be carried on indefinitely, because they could not publicly sell the Negroes when they came home, so they desired to make but one voyage, to bring the Negroes on shore privately, and divide them among their own plantations. In a word, the question was whether I would go as their supercargo in the ship to manage the trading part upon the coast of Guinea. They offered me an equal share of the Negroes without my providing any part of the stock. This would have been a fair proposal, it must be confessed, had it been made to anyone that had not had a settlement and plantation of his own to look after, which was in a fair way of becoming very considerable, and with a good stock upon it. But I was thus entered and established, and had nothing to do but go on as I had begun, and by sending for the other £100 from England in 3 or 4 years, I could scarcely have failed being worth £3,000 or £4,000 sterling, and that increasing too. For me to think of such a voyage as these men proposed was the most preposterous thing that ever man in such circumstances could be guilty of. However, I told them that I would go with all my heart, if they would undertake to look after my plantation in my absence, and would dispose of it to such as I should direct if my plans miscarried. This they all agreed to do, and entered into writings or covenants to do so. I made a formal will, disposing of my plantation and effects in case of my death, making the captain of the ship that saved my life as before my only heir. However, I obliged him to dispose of my effects as I had directed in my will, one half of the produce being to himself and the other to be shipped to England. In short, I took all possible caution to preserve my effects and keep up my plantation. Had I used half as much prudence in looking into my own interest, and making a judgment of what I ought to have done and ought not to have done, I had certainly never gone away from so prosperous an undertaking, leaving what was in all probability a thriving circumstance to go upon a voyage to sea attended with all its common hazards. But I was hurried on, and obeyed blindly the dictates of my fancy rather than my reason. Accordingly, when the ship was fitted out and the cargo furnished, and all things done as by agreement by my partners in the voyage, I went on board in an evil hour, the 1st of September, just 8 years from the day when I had left my father and mother and had sailed from Hull. Our ship was about 120 tons burden, carried 6 guns and 14 men besides the master, his boy, and myself. We had on board no large cargo of goods except such toys as were fit for our trade with the negroes, such as beads, bits of glass, shells, and odd trifles, especially little looking-glasses, knives, scissors, hatchets, and the like. The same day I went on board, we set sail, standing away to the northward upon our own coast, with design to stretch over for the African coast, when we came about 10 or 12 degrees of northern latitude, which it seems was the manner of the course in those days. We had very good weather, only excessively hot, all the way upon our own coast, till we came to the height of Cape St. Augustine. From there, keeping farther off at sea, we lost sight of land and steered as if we were bound for the Isle Fernand de Noronha, holding our course northeast by north and leaving those isles on the east. In this course we passed the line in about 12 days' time, and were by our last observation in 7 degrees 22 minutes northern latitude, when a violent tornado or hurricane took us quite out of our knowledge. It began from the southeast, came about to the northwest, excuse me, and then settled into the northeast, whence it blew in such a terrible manner that for 12 days together we could do nothing but drive, and scudding away before it, let it carry us wherever fate and the fury of the winds directed. In this distress, besides the terror of the storm, one of our men died of fever, and one man and the boy were washed overboard. About the 12th day, when the weather abated a little, the master made an observation as well as he could, and found that he was in about 11 degrees north latitude, but that he was 22 degrees of longitude difference west from Cape St. Augustine. Thus he found that he was off the north coast of Brazil, beyond the river the Amazon, toward that of the river Orinoco, commonly called the Great River. I studied the charts with him, and we concluded that there was no inhabited country where we could land till we came within the circle of the Caribbee Islands. Therefore, we resolved to stand away for Barbados, which, by keeping off at sea to avoid the current of the Bay or Gulf of Mexico, we could easily reach, as we hoped, in about 15 days' sail. On the other hand, we could not possibly make our voyage to the coast of Africa without some assistance, both to our ship and to ourselves. With this design, we changed our course and steered away northwest by west in order to reach some of our English islands where I hoped for relief. However, our voyage was otherwise determined. When we were in the latitude of 12 degrees 18 minutes, a second storm came upon us, which carried us westward with the same force and drove us so out of the way of civilization that had all our lives been saved as to the sea, we were in danger of being devoured by savages. While we were in this distress, with the wind still blowing very hard, one of our men, early in the morning, cried out, "Land!" We had no sooner run out of the cabin to look out in the hope of seeing where in the world we were, when the ship struck upon sand, and in a moment the sea broke over her in such a manner that we expected to perish immediately. We were driven at once into our close quarters for shelter from the very foam and spray of the sea. It is not easy for anyone who has not been in the same condition to conceive the consternation of men in such circumstances. We knew nothing where we were, or upon what land it was we were driven, whether an island or the main, whether inhabited or not inhabited. As the rage of the wind was still great, though rather less than at first, we could not so much as hope to have the ship hold many minutes without breaking in pieces unless the winds, by a kind of miracle, should turn immediately about. In a word, we sat looking upon one another and expecting death every moment. Every man acted accordingly, as though he were preparing for another world, for there was little or nothing more for us to do in this. Our present comfort, and all the comfort we had, was that, contrary to our expectation, the ship did not break yet, and the master said the wind began to abate. Now, though we found that the wind did a little abate, yet the ship was sticking too fast upon the sand for us to expect to get her off, and we were in a dreadful condition indeed. We had nothing to do but to think of saving our lives as well as we could. We had a boat at our stern just before the storm, but she had first staved by dashing against the ship's rudder, and in the next place she had broken away and either sunk or was driven off to sea, so that there was no hope from her. We had another boat on board, but how to get her off into the sea was a doubtful thing. However, there was no time to debate, for we fancied the ship would break in pieces every minute, and some told us she was actually beginning to break already. In this distress, the mate of our vessel laid hold of the boat, and with the help of the rest of the men, got her slung over the ship's side. We all, 11 in number, got into her, let go, and committed ourselves to God's mercy in the wild sea. And now our case was very dismal indeed, for we all saw plainly the sea went so high that the boat could not live, and that we should inevitably be drowned. We had no sail, nor if we had could we have done anything with it, so we worked at the oar toward the land, though with heavy hearts, like men going to execution. We all knew that when the boat came nearer the shore, she would be dashed in 1,000 pieces by the breach of the sea. However, we committed our souls to God in the most earnest manner, and the wind driving us toward the shore, we hastened our destruction with our own hands, pulling as well as we could toward land. What the shore was, whether rock or sand, whether steep or shoal, we knew not. The only hope that could rationally give us the least shadow of expectation was that we might happen into some bay or gulf or the mouth of some river, where by great chance we could run our boat in or get under the lee of the land and perhaps make smooth water. But nothing of this kind appeared, and as we made nearer and nearer the shore, the land looked more frightful than the sea. After we had rowed, or rather driven, about 1.5 leagues as we reckoned it, a raging wave, mountain-like, came rolling astern of us. It took us with such a fury that it upset the boat at once and separated us as well from the boat as from one another. Nothing can describe the confusion of thought which I felt when I sank into the water. Although I swam very well, I could not deliver myself from the water so as to draw breath, till that wave, having driven me, or rather carried me, a vast way on toward the shore, spent itself and went back, leaving me upon the land almost dry, but half dead with the water I took in. I had so much presence of mind as well as breath left that, seeing myself nearer the mainland than I expected, I got upon my feet and endeavored to make on toward it as fast as I could before another wave should return and take me up again. But I soon found that it was impossible to avoid it. I saw the sea come after me as high as a great hill, and as furious as an enemy which I had no means or strength to contend with. My business was to hold my breath, and raise myself upon the water if I could, and pilot myself toward safety if possible. My greatest concern now was that the wave would carry me a great way toward the shore when it came on, might not carry me back again with it when it gave back toward the sea. The wave that came upon me again buried me at once 20 or 30 feet deep in its own body, and I could feel myself carried with a mighty force and swiftness toward the shore a very great way. I held my breath and assisted myself to swim forward with all my might. I was ready to burst with holding my breath when I felt myself rising up, and to my immediate relief, I found my head and hands shoot out above the surface of the water. Though it was not 2 seconds of time that I could keep myself so, yet it relieved me greatly, gave me breath and new courage. I was covered again with water a good while, but not so long but I held it out. When I found that the water had spent itself and was beginning to return, I struck forward against the return of the waves and felt ground again with my feet. I stood still a few moments to recover breath until the water went from me, and then took to my heels and ran with what strength I had farther up the shore. But neither would this deliver me from the fury of the sea, which came pouring in after me again, and twice more I was lifted up by the waves and carried forward as before, the shore being very flat. The last time was almost fatal to me, for when the sea had hurried me along as before, it dashed me against a piece of rock with such force that it left me senseless and helpless to save myself. I struck my side and breast so that the breath was beaten out of my body, and had it not returned again immediately, I must have been strangled in the water. However, I recovered a little before the return of the waves, and since the waves were not so high as at first, being near land, I held fast to the rock till the wave abated. Then I managed another run, which brought me so near the shore that the next wave, though it went over me, did not carry me away. The next run I took, I got to the mainland, where, to my great comfort, I clambered up the clefts of the shore and sat down upon the grass, free from danger and quite out of reach of the water. We'll stop there and start next time with chapter 4. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.